Steve.
So do I need to do anything to share my screen here?
No, everyone can see the slides you've got, but if you want to share the screen you've got in front of you, then yes, you can certainly do that by going to the share menu as we practiced on Monday.
Share at the top. So share my desktop. Apologies, everyone. That's just, okay. Slides. Okay, welcome everyone, and thank you very much for that introduction, Dom. Hopefully you can see
Steve, sorry, Jed, just one, you don't have to share your desktop. We've got these slides live and everyone can see them.
I didn't share the desktop because I'm going to dip in and out of devices.
Okay, in which case I need to tell people how to, in which case I just need to remind people how to chat during this. Guys, at the moment you've got Steve's desktop in front of you, which is great. Go to the top of the screen. There's a chat button. If you click that, you should find a chat menu. Your chat window pops up, and that will allow you to get the chat up. You should find that you can do that. Okay, so go to the top of the screen. The little menu bar will pop down. Click the chat button, and your chat window will pop up. Okay, looks like people have got that. And Jonathan says it was intuitive. I found it. And if you're on alternative browsers, you may find that the button is at the bottom rather than the top. All right. Sorry, Steve. We're going to run into a problem with the poll as well.
Okay.
So
just get people to put it into the chat room then.
Let's do that. Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Right, I apologise for causing confusion. It's just that I want to show you some real examples and dip into a browser on my device, etc. So I thought it would be useful to be able to do that. So and hopefully you'll appreciate seeing some real demos of things. Yeah, so what we're going to talk about today is e-learning in a multi-device world, and some of the things I'm going to show really just things that we've been thinking about, things that we've been doing with clients, and there's a right or a wrong way to do this. I'd be really keen to get everybody's feedback on the sort of things that we're going to talk about this afternoon. Please, I'm going to talk about breaking some cardinal rules in e-learning design, which I think have to change fairly fundamentally. So I'm sure it will create some discussion, and yeah, it may not be right or wrong, but I'm really keen to provoke some debate around it. So I want to start with a poll, but we're going to do this in the chat room now. So I really want to think about how many devices do you use in a typical day? Now that could be a desktop, a laptop, a smartphone, multiple smartphones, tablets, Kindles, iPads, etc. So how many devices do you use in a typical day? You could just enter that into the chat room and then Doc can tell me what that's looking like.
But Steve, you can see it as well. If you go to your...
I can see at the top. I can see.
Yeah.
I can see lots of.
Well, I mean, obviously, my remarkable brain is capable of taking an average of them.
I hope you're averaging that, Don.
Yeah. That's it's around 3.4 at the moment. John Prider says maybe we could do a poll here. John, we had a poll set up. To be fair, Steve's doing his desktop instead, so we're just going to carry on with this way. But you're right, John. We could do that. So, but the key answer is everyone, almost everyone, saying more than one. So back to you, Steve.
Yeah, John says it looks like 3,000 on average. So someone said 3.142. I think the key lesson from that, and I'm glad that you all said 3s and 4s, various things inside of that. Otherwise, this session today might be a little bit pointless. I think we're all conscious that we live in a multi-device world, really. We access the internet in a number of different ways. We access it from different smartphones, from a laptop, from a desktop. Increasingly, we access it from tablets. The iPad is the best-selling computer ever. I think it sold something like 6 million in its first year. So we live in a multi-device world, and that has implications for how we do content for multiple devices, and it has implications really about the way we use these devices. And there was a great survey that came out recently from Google, which you may have seen a few weeks ago, which looked at how do people use devices and why do they use them. What I found was that people use computers, laptops and things like that in a context where it's generally productive, task-orientated, where people need a bit of time, a bit of focus, it's reasonably serious, it's an intensive attitude. And motivation is finding information, keeping up to date. And it's a really good survey on a sort of multi-screen world. I've posted the link at the bottom there. All the links are available in the slides later as well. So that's what they found people using computers. Phones, context was different. People want to communicate. they've got short bursts of time, they need things quickly, immediately. Finding came up here, and the Google survey, and this may be wrong, yeah, you guys can comment on this, was that 60% of smartphone usage was actually at home. Most of it sat on a sofa in front of a TV, so that was interesting in terms of how people use their smartphones, tweeting about TV programs or whatever else they're doing, or looking at the age of film stars. But in context of how people use smartphones, how do people use tablets, the context was much more relaxed. People like browse, it's a bit more leisurely, really using it for communication, entertainment. So people are using lots of different devices and in slightly different contexts, really. And I think we're conscious, because all of you are using multiple devices, that we live in this multi-device world. And I think the world of the web a few years ago really tried to do a binary split. It said, really, we've got desktops and we've got mobile. We've got sort of HTML and Flash on desktops, and then we've got all these various mobile Androids and Apple systems, etc. And I think the web is looking at, we must have a website, we must have a mobile website. And the same happened in e-learning, really, when people started sort of saying, well, what do we do? I think it's partly we're responsible as vendors, so I take a degree of responsibility for this. But I think there was a lot of vendor hype about mobile, saying we must have a mobile strategy, we've better content on mobiles, etc. And we reinforced a bit of a dichotomy between desktop and mobile. I don't think that's necessarily the case, and it'd be good to get views at the end of this session. The reality is not desktop versus mobile, but multi-device delivery. It's simply not that straightforward binary split. And we can see that. I've been doing some research about the web, and when we look at the web, you can see it moving from model design to responsive design for multiple devices. What this screen shows is the volume of Google searches that comes from Google Insights, which is a fantastic tool. If you don't use it, you can see what volume of searches for any term. And so you'll see here that in 2010, mobile web design was quite hot. It was higher than responsive web design, which is the blue line at the bottom. But as we moved into 2011, 2012, responsive web design becomes incredibly popular. Advances in HTML suddenly mean that we can devise one website that responds to all devices. We no longer need to have a desktop website and a mobile website. We just have one, and it responds. And that's becoming incredibly common on the web. And I just wanted to share a couple of examples, which is why I'm sharing my desktop here. So if I just pick out one of these examples, I'll show you then others. But this is a website from Google. It's the Cultural Institute website. If I make this site smaller, I hope you'll see this happening on your kit. If I view it on a tablet, I get a slightly different layout than if I view it on a desktop. If I, excuse me, trying to grab corners of screens. If I move to a mobile phone size, drag the whole thing here rather than making it smaller. I'm now going to make it. In a second, I'm just having difficulty grabbing the corners of my screen because on WebEx anyway, if I now look at it on a phone, you'll see that it's resized and reformatted all of the content so that I can view it on a phone. And if I drag it back out again, if I can catch this jumping cursor, that's on a desktop. So what Google are doing with these websites is using responsive designs, using HTML5 primarily, so that it really responds to the screen size. It's a fluid layout, and whatever screen size, it gradually adjusts accordingly so that you can view it on multiple devices, but it's a single version. And lots of examples of these now on the web becoming quite common. So if you want to look at some of them yourselves, and you can practice rather than me trying to grab the corner of a screen and shrinking it, this shell.com. On the left-hand side is the Shell Global homepage for a desktop. When you shrink it down, it looks very different on a mobile phone. And there are lots of examples. The Boston Globe is a big example of newspapers following this lead, where you have a large screen and you shrink it down to a phone. It's exactly the same screen, it's exactly the same URL, but the content responds to the size of the screen that you're on. And what's interesting is, and I'll show examples of these, it's not just about moving the content around, but actually intelligent resizing. So you can see on the Boston Globe, the pictures disappear because they just hide them when you get to a smaller screen size within responsive HTML. And I can show you some clever things that you can do so you can do with responsive design. So that's a first thing that's happening on the web, is moving heavily towards responsive design. It does sense to run a mobile website for your website, you have to update, etc., and a desktop one when you can produce a single version that responds and on every device. And so when Apple bring out the iPhone 5 and the screen is 18% bigger as it is, you can have a site that automatically responds. The other thing that we're seeing here is a new navigation on the web. I think it's driven primarily because we scroll nicely on a tablet and a phone. It's nice to use your thumb or your finger, and you just keep scrolling up. And a lot of our learning is designed with a next button, which tends to drive us to a new screen, typically the next button point right. And it really follows the metaphor of a book. But a book is that because physically that's how it has to. On the web, we can actually scroll down a screen nice and comfortably. We don't have to click next. And you can get very elegant designs using a vertical scrolling. And in some ways, it's not navigation. Clicking next is navigation, but scrolling up and down is so natural, it doesn't even feel like navigation. And it's becoming a web norm. And I'm just going to give a couple of examples of scrolling designs here. So if I pick up the first one. So I'll try and make this a little bit bigger for you on my desktop, but hopefully, it's hard. It's about bouncing mouse on WebEx to drag it. Anyway, a bit bigger. So here I've got something on the Titanic, and I can scroll down. So I've got a bit of introductory content. I can scroll down, and I can now play a piece of video in this particular screen. I can scroll down a little bit further, go below the iceberg. I can then have another form of interaction, and this can be a HTML5 interaction, and has different things that you can do with HTML5. But you'll see that we're not clicking next to go to the next screen. We're just continuing to scroll down the page. I think in e-learning we've been obsessed for many years with a number of things. We're obsessed with saying all the content must be on that screen, and you must click next to go to the next screen. And I suppose the question is, does that make any sense? Why can't I just scroll down to the next interaction? Why do I have to press next? And actually, with the use of visual images and things, as in this case, I can create something that looks quite engaging and follows through in a story. And the time's asking about how long it takes to load. Actually, it progressively loads, and I'll show you an example of that. So actually, as you move down, it progressively loads additional elements, and I'll show you that in a moment. So that's one example. The other example here is just one about hydraulic fracturing, I think called fracking, more in the UK. I can scroll down to sort of the story of fracking. So what is it? I can scroll down and see what happens, and it involves trucks and various people get sites. We've got 400 tankers, etc. So I've got a scrolling design. I could click through next, but I can scroll down. And there's a lot of evidence on the web that people are really liking scrolling. And if I dip back to my slides, there are really good examples of this. So some of the people who advocate scrolling, the first people are Amazon. Every product has a single page. If you go to amazon.co.uk, you look for the Kindle page, the product is huge. You scroll down, you scroll down, you scroll down. It's a huge page all about the Kindle. You can find out everything you want. You don't click next to go to another page. It's all on one page. And it's one of the best-selling products. So they clearly do not have a problem with scrolling, selling their products. A company has recently redesigned the Volvo website using long single section pages for the different cars. As they did the analysis and looked at the stats, not all people scroll all the way down. It's probably saying that you track how far someone scrolls down a page, so it's no different than clicking next, where you can see how far people scroll down. So whilst all people scrolled down, 46% of people were seeing the majority of the content. When they were clicking to go to the next page in that sequence, like a book, only 18% saw it. So more people were going down just on simple scrolling than clicking a next to another page. And I think there's something there about the intuitiveness of scrolling, particularly now that we've got devices where we can use our thumbs and our fingers. And another example here, I think I've got this one up as well. Even within scrolling, you can have navigation. So if I show this here, This is the web page HTML5, but if I roll over the nav on the left-hand side, hopefully you can see I've got a menu here, and if I click the technology, it scrolls me to the page, and it disappears when I roll my finger off it, or mouse off it, and then click, and I can do these fairly standard forms of HTML5 interactions on this particular page. So interesting, because HTML is getting better. So you can have built-in navigation on the side of pages if you want to click to a page and scroll up and down to it. You can progressively load them, which is really nice because that's faster than clicking to a new page and then loading the next page. Another interesting things that you can do, so I have to move this around a bit because all the chat pages are flying across the top for me, is HTML is coming a long way. This is a module we built for McDonald's in HTML5, and what you hear is you can spin around a restaurant and get information about what you do and information on different parts of a restaurant as I scroll it through. This is all just built in HTML5. We don't need Flash to do simple things like this. So HTML5 has come a long way. So what I really wanted to show here is we've got a bit more HTML5 interactivity. What does that mean for e-learning? So we're seeing on the web doing responsive designs, they're doing scrolling, they're using more HTML5 interactivity. What does it mean for us? Our first question is, do you do e-learning that works on only one device? And the answer is yes today. Will you only deliver that e-learning on one device next year? Or do you deliver your e-learning on multiple devices? And the only thing I think we know is that there'll be more and more devices. So we now have an Apple iPhone 5, that's 18% bigger than the last one. We know we're going to have an iPad mini on the way, according to all the rumors. We're going to have lots of devices. And I think you have to ask yourself this question, you're starting on a project, is this content going to go out to one device? And that might be all you're doing. It's just going to be delivered in the office. We can bring Flash on a desktop, and that's fine. But I think you have to ask yourself the question is, will it work on multiple devices? I got almost a complaint from a very senior person in the client the other day who said, Steve, you've been building this stuff for an Articulate because it's the tool we chose and we use internally, and it's terrible because it won't work on my iPad. So I had to explain that it wouldn't because they use Articulate, and the version they have of Articulate Presenter produces Flash. And he said to me, Steve, why would anyone build content that doesn't work on an iPad? And I thought it was quite a question, and I think increasingly we're going to have a generation who just expect content to work on whatever device they have. And I think I probably pejoratively called this the old world. It's probably the current world in reality. But the way people deliver to multiple devices at the moment, I think, is they tend to do different versions. So I might say, actually, we need an app for an iPhone. We need an app for the BlackBerry. We need an app for the Samsung devices. We might a Flash version for the desktop. We'll have an HTML version for the iPads, and we'll publish out an HTML version. You might even do that for a single source publishing, but that's quite complicated. Some tools go part way there. Even if you publish out from a single tool, you tend to have different versions. So you have different SCORM objects that you then have to update, you have to track, you have to distribute some way to people's devices. And if you end up with 4 or 5 versions, then you've got to have different language versions. It gets very complicated. But I think that's really the current world where a lot of people are going at the moment, is producing different versions. I think world, and this is where I'm not saying this is right or wrong. I've got some ideas around this. I'm just trying to see what's happening on the web and what it means for us. But I think potentially the world is responsive e-learning design. And someone mentioned bring your own device up in the chat room. I can see lots of chats going through. In terms of us, a lot of companies are starting to look at bring your own device. So people will bring whatever device they have. You've got to make it work. So it seems to be one version that works on all devices. So why publish multiple versions? If you can publish a single version, why would you do a version that only works on an iPhone when you might have people accessing it on other devices? And I think these are good questions, really. And we think it really is about responsive design. And what we mean by that is one version that responds, not multiple versions, using fluid layouts in content. And people have said to me, I've talked to people about this, it's a dream, and it's clearly not a dream because it's happening on the web. And I want to show you something that we built. And what I want to say before we go into this is we built this using standard web technologies, so there's nothing here proprietary to Kineo. Yes, the particular framework and stuff that we developed is ours, but you can build this using standard web technologies. There's nothing proprietary. I'm not trying to sell that. I'm a great believer in open standards, so you can use HTML5, etc. But let's just show you some things that we're doing, and then you can give me your reactions to this. So we've just called our internal framework adapt. So I've got a menu here which has got blocks. So I'm showing you components here. I'm not showing a sort of polished program because I think it's easier in blocks here. So there's a menu that may work on a desktop. I make that screen smaller. A little bit smaller. So I've got to catch the end of So I've made that screen smaller. So on a tablet, it uses in a block of 4 like that. If I, on a smaller device again, on a phone, it adapts the menu to work on a mobile phone. So, and if I scroll back again, I can get to the desktop version. It's one version. It's adapting to the different screen sizes. It's not really adapting to different devices. It's adapting in a fluid layout to screen sizes so that it will work on every device. If I dip into a menu item here, I'll just make it bigger so you can see. You can sub-menus and topics, and this is where which some of you may disagree with fundamentally about scrolling. Typically, I would go to a subsection of an e-learning program, and I'd have 6, 7, 5, however many pages I click through on next. Here we've done instead is have a scrolling page. So, and this is not done with a particular piece of content in mind, so I'm just going to show you components, really. I've got a simple animation which introduces me to it. This is just an animation built in HTML5. It's not Flash. There's no Flash any near this. I can now scroll down to a second HTML animation which has got key facts about HTML5, so I can dip into here. I can visit. I can dip into the next animation, etc. So I've got a range of key facts there, animation, and then scroll down and do a typical sort of carousel type screen. You might use a narrative screen. I've got an image and some text. I move through with image and text. So I've got another component. Have a text and graphic. I can put components side by side, so I can have a bit of video here. I've got a multiple choice question, so I can have a question, I can hit submit, I can get feedback. So I can build a whole range of components that I might normally have as separate screens in a piece of e-learning. And I can build them into a simple and elegant scrolling page, and I can continue to scroll. Now down, it's been loading that page whilst I'm at the top of the page. It's loading it effectively as I go, which gets you, it doesn't load the whole page in one go, but as I scroll down. And as I say, you can track how far somebody scrolls down, and we can have different types of interactions. So I think the whole idea of sections of an e-learning program have a scrolling design is an interesting one, and it probably follows more the mode of information graphics. And I was wrong. Here's the second Brighton police car a day coming through. For those of you who know Brighton, you'll know that this is not unusual for us.
I think, Steve, they know you're a tricky customer. They've called for backup.
So, yeah, they're coming around. So that's just one, and there's multiple police cars. But I'll show you the clever bit, because that's the easy bit, really. Okay, we've got scrolling designs, we've got responsive menus. Let me move this to a mobile phone size. So I'm going to drag now our adapt framework to a mobile phone size and show you what happens. And here, I hope you can see this clearly, is the first thing that's happened is that animation we have has just become a small graphic. The second animation on key facts that you recall is now a clickable component. We've taken the text from the animation on the HTML and decided on the phone version we'll actually show it as just clickable text. We won't show the animation because some animations may be too large to work realistically on a device. That little scrolling screen device that we had, we've got this now on a phone, and I can't show you my phone here, but on phone it's really quite nice because I can just slide through it with my fingers, and I can slide through these various screens here, and I can bring up the information in an additional window. So I've shrunk it, I've changed also the layout and the design. The other thing is if I continue scrolling down, you'll see there's the video, there's some more content, but you'll say, well, the multiple choice question we have in the bigger version doesn't exist on the phone version, and that's because in these CS style sheets you can literally just say turn them on and off for different screen sizes. So I can have some content like the question that appears on desktop, but when I view it on a mobile, that content disappears, and vice versa. I can have content that appears on a small screen size, which doesn't appear on big screen size, but it's still a single version. So that's what we're doing is playing with, okay, what's happening on the web? Why don't we build a version that works on all devices? And some are asking about browsers, and I'll come on to those in a moment. Because we just have one version here. Other nice features about this is that it's HTML, so we have an accessible screen reader version as well. Other things, I just click on the settings up here. We can allow people to navigate by topics by clicking on the settings. And because it's HTML, we can actually search all the titles and the headings and those sorts of things as well. So if we're on a phone, we could quickly search through to find a relevant section of the content. So they're the sorts of things that we've been playing. Now, some of you will say, Steve, I really hate that scrolling design. Whatever you say, whatever's happening on the web, it's just not the future for us. You can all use responsive design. You don't need to have a scrolling design. So here's an example of content we've built for Barclays on an onboarding program. This is your nice next button. You'll be very familiar with it if you're comfortable and like a next button. But if I make this screen smaller and view this on a mobile phone, sorry, just catch the corner of the screen. I hope I will catch the corner of the screen. Okay, catch the corner of the screen. Move it to a mobile phone size. The whole thing adjusts. I've still got my interactive content. I've still got my next button at the bottom here to move through a next page. So if you want responsive design, but you really don't like scrolling, that's not a problem either. You can do that. So I'm going to try and drag this screen a bit big. And if you've got on a desktop or iPad, an iPad we just have slightly smaller image than we have, we shrink it a bit than we have on a desktop. So you can have responsive design with your next pages if you really want to follow that metaphor of the book and click next and go to the next page, or you can scroll. So I'm just going to talk through a few around it because these things are never straightforward. But I'm hoping here you begin to get a sense of what we're talking about. As I say, I'm not saying this is the right way, wrong way. I'm just saying the web world is changing. I don't think it's necessarily about mobile and about desktop. I think it's about mobile devices and us designing versions that do both. So let me just talk through some of the issues and then we can open up things. I think someone's right about horizontal scrolling. Partly we couldn't do that. It's a book format. For some people, vertical scrolling is just much more intuitive. I talked to you about intelligent responsiveness. This is not just about reformatting content and making it work on a smaller device. You can actually simplify the content for smartphones, or you can extra content for phone onlys. You can change the interaction. So the one I showed you there, we have a key facts clickable animation, and we turn that simply into the text. So we can actually have interactions that do different things on different screen sizes. And we can just remove images entirely if we want from the smartphone version. And that's what's happened. You see on that Boston Globe thing, they've got images on the desktop. When you go to the phone, they get rid of the images for you. It's really intelligent responsiveness, not just simply moving content around. I've shown you the example of Barclays where you can still have it with a next button if you really like the next buttons. So what does it mean? I think we have to rethink e-learning design personally. A lot of it's fantastic, it works well, we have lots of evidence it works well, but I think with the way the web's moving, I think we've got to think about shorter but possibly deeper learning journeys. I think the navigation has to be a meaningful part, and I think scrolling can play a role in that. I think because of HTML, suddenly we have accessible content. We certainly have accessible content, but also the potential of those long scrolling pages is reusable content objects within the page. So my multiple choice question, my video, etc. They're all content in small blocks that I can put together in my long scrolling page. I can take out and reuse in other contexts. And I have to rethink the journey on the different devices. So, we wouldn't want the same content on the desktop as on the mobile. However, we can still achieve that within a single version. So some of the benefits we think of this is, firstly, it works on all devices. So no matter what device you have, as long as you've got a fluid layout, it will display the layout at appropriate size. It means you have one version to track and maintain. So you're not updating an iPhone native app or a BlackBerry app or a version. You have one version. It's also distributed, particularly if your LMS has a mobile front end. People get access their content from a mobile front end. Some of you may not have that with your LMSs yet, but believe me, all the LMSs will have mobile front ends. I talk to people who said, well, actually, Steve, we have a completely different mobile platform which distributes content to apps and tracks it over here. But yes, we do distribute some of the same content on our desktop LMS, and we track it over here. And why you do that? Why have a separate platform for mobile and a separate platform for desktop, tracking different content, pushing different forms, when you can do a single version, access it from a single LMS or website? Other benefits are it's accessible, so it works with a screen reader. There are all sorts of issues if you're publishing, obviously, in Flash and native apps and those sorts of things. It's searchable content. We all think it's very cost-effective. We've done a number of projects in Angular with clients at the moment, and we're starting a batch of new ones. As most of the clients we've shown this to, very excited, and we're getting very full with people wanting this. But what we're seeing is that it really doesn't cost us much more to produce, not much more at all, to produce a responsive version than produce a normal version if we built it in Flash or HTML, for example. But that means we no longer have the issue about mobile devices. We have no longer the issue about accessible versions. Another thing which I think is really interesting about living in a multi-screen world is that it allows sequential screening. One of the Google survey found, which I think is really interesting, is people sequential screen, as Google call it. And basically 90% of people use screens to accomplish the same task over time. So they might look up something to buy on their phone. They may then do a bit more on it on the iPad. They may buy it on the laptop or vice versa. But there's 90% of people sequentially screen on the same task. Now, if it's a single version, that's fine, because you can do section 1 on your phone, and it's tracked. You can do section 2 on your iPad, it's tracked. You can do section 3 on your desktop, it's tracked, because you're on the LMS, etc. It's a single version. Where you couldn't do that if you've got multiple versions, or you probably could do it with a lot of work to make all that tracking happen. So I think the world is moving to sequential screening, and I think that's interesting for us in e-learning as well. And will we have a generation come through that just expects that I start my e-learning on this device, I can finish it on that device? What does it matter? It's just a device connected to the internet. And so I think we're going to have people who expect to sequentially screen. Questions. I want an offline version. That's okay. You can have an offline version. You can download the content to your phone if you want an offline version, so that's okay. In fact, I use the Financial Times web app, and it does exactly that. It does the edition as soon as I load it up in the morning, and I can use it offline all day. There are other issues. If you're one of those unfortunate people still on IE6, you're going to need a fallback HTML version. HTML5 is designed for more modern browsers, and I know there are lots of you out there with old browsers, and it's difficult. It's difficult for all of us. I mean, IE6 is 13 years old. The manufacturer recommends you absolutely don't use it, and Microsoft will not support it, and yet we still have lots of organizations using it. Of course, they still expect e-learning companies to make everything work perfectly on a browser that's 13 years old and unsupported. Day of a lot of our lives. So there are issues if you're on old browsers. So there is that. Access to phone functions. With a native app, you get more access to phone functions. So if you're designing a piece of e-learning that really is to use people's contact books or people's cameras, then you could be better off with a native app. Although some of that's coming. So, for example, the browser now can access your sort of geoposition, etc. And more of those are coming. But there is slightly more limitations on what you can access of phone functions. Say that there's still a role for native apps. So don't get me wrong here. I'm just trying to explore ways in which you can do this. I mean, the picture right there is a native app we built for Nikon for all their salespeople on an iPad, which they use in-store with customers, etc. Sense is, and it'd be really great to get everybody's feedback. My sense is that native apps may be used more for performance support, because you do nice things with native apps. It's not necessarily learning. It's often just in time how to do something. Think about how I use my phone, and sort of apps I use is when's the next train. I use Google Maps, etc. I use very performance support-based apps. I do also occasionally get the look at the paper and things like that. But I think maybe the role native apps may be more focused on performance support, maybe where you need to track less and things like that, maybe where you're updating less frequently. So I think there are some questions, there are some issues. So future, again, this is not old world, this is probably current world where people are authoring content just for mobiles, or they buy a mobile authoring tool, or they do a Flash authoring tool, and they publish out multiple versions. And I'm not sure it'll be like that in the future. I'm not sure why would you buy a mobile authoring tool if it only publishes to mobiles. And I think most of them will have a fallback sort of HTML4 option, say, well, okay, it would work on this. But you've still got multiple versions. And there may be places because Flash is still great for lots of things. If you're doing a big systems piece of training, then Flash is still great, and you're probably going to on a desktop because the system you're simulating probably isn't that on the phone. Probably. So there are some things where you would still use Flash on a desktop, and if you're only delivering to an audience and it only needs to be delivered on one device, and you know that's a desktop and it has Flash, then Flash works incredibly well, so I would definitely recommend it. But I think we will shift over time to a new world, and I think the new world will be responsive authoring, and that's because A, we're doing it and we're getting a lot of positive reaction from clients, but also we're just seeing it on the web. We're seeing big companies, big newspapers saying, we don't want multiple versions of our content. We want a single version and we want it to run on every device. So we're seeing people say, we want a single version of content. And I think it's something that we have to think about in e-learning. I'm not saying here we've got everything right or wrong. I'm really just putting it, so hopefully it raises some questions for everyone to think about. What are we doing in e-learning? Are we just following vendor hype and going down, and I take some responsibility for that, saying we must have mobile, or whatever it happens to be. Are we looking at the bigger picture, as simple as desktop versus mobile, or really what we're talking about is a multi-device delivery strategy? So I'm really just trying to provoke some questions today, and I'm really interested in also views on scrolling designs, because I think there's a lot of potential for scrolling designs. We've done some very nice stories where you scroll down, which are very intuitive, and it doesn't feel like navigation. So that I really wanted to cover today. I've got loads of other things I could share, but I just really want to sort of provoke some ideas and discussions. I'm going to come off full screen, see some of the questions that come in, and Don, if you want to throw questions at me, I will do my best to answer them.
Steve, did you say you were hoping to provoke some questions? Because if so, you certainly succeeded. If you could just drop the thing of the desktop, that can get us back to where we were. I'll pull up the same slide on the on WebEx. Goodness me. Thank you to Steve. I did tell Steve that this was going to be a well-attended session. We've got 300 people online. The reason why it's so popular is that this is a terribly important topic, and that's reflected, I have to say, in the questions that we've got. We've got an awful lot of questions. Please keep them coming. I'm going to try and rattle through as many as possible. Steve, you're going to just have to duck and dove and deal with these as quickly as you can.
As I can.
Twitter has been going completely bonkers while we've been doing this as well. So, yes, predictably, the falling issue raised a few points. Some people saying they didn't like it, other people saying they did like it. But some specific questions. Doug Woods says, swing down appears to work well with graphics. Lots of text. Scondre says, how does it affect printing from a web page? Fair enough point. Matthew Miller raised the point that Jakob Nielsen had said that people don't scroll. It's a myth. He's gone back on it, but we're still excited with the idea. But let's come back to those points of Scott and Doug.
Okay.
What lots of text? What about printing?
First box of text is that, to be honest, if your e-learning is lots of text, that may not be the best anyway. So there's about how much text. You would break text up generally. So I can't dip back into the mouse control over now to there, but we can break text up like that carousel screen you saw, where we move it between and we chunk down the text to something which is manageable. Your scrolling page can still be long. I go back to the example of the Kindle, which is a huge scrolling page. I do advocate you to go and have a look at that online, because it's one of their best-selling products, and they've got a very large scrolling page. I think if you've got lots of text, it's to break that anyway, and so you may break it down into clickable bits of text to bits of video, maybe bits of audio, questions, break and chunking it down. So I think you probably wouldn't have lots of text anyway. If you did, you might just find a nicely designed PDF that serves the purpose equally well. There are around printing, you have to define various print areas and options. I have to say, as a general view, a lot of our clients aren't printing stuff, but you can do that. The other thing is you can take a HTML page and turn it into a nice PDF, etc. So you can then print it as a PDF format if people want a print version. I'll generally say we have less and less people wanting print versions.
Okay.
And a lot of what I do is just I send PDFs to my iPad, so when I'm in meetings I just scroll up and down the PDF on my iPad. I don't.
So we can get around those one problem, and the other one may be a design issue. Kassam, you said it is responsive e-learning design. I appreciate there was a lot of content there, easy to miss. A lot of questions about the impact of LMS on the LMS of both HTML5 and e-learning. I think there's a certain amount of necessarily confusion, but a lot of different issues going on here. So let's pick out firstly, Steve, the question raised by a lot of people, who I won't name check, about tracking what happens if you're asking people to scroll down through a page,
Yeah.
and you want to know, have they done something? There's a risk, as Henrietta said, they might miss something, and Robin Lowell pointed out, and a lot of other people, how do we know where else they've got to on that scrolling page?
Yeah, so yes, you can track absolutely how far somebody scrolls down a page. So there is no issue with that. You can track. So firstly, what I should say is that you would publish a responsive HTML5 designer as a SCORM object. You would load it into your LMS just like any other object, so you can launch out. Now, if you've got a particular LMS that has to launch at a certain size window, there could be some issues about that, because then there'd be lots of scrolling if you can't make it a slightly bigger screen, etc. But you would have a single HTML SCORM object in exactly the same way you do on your LMSs at the moment. In terms of scrolling down, yes, you can track down how far somebody scrolled within a page. That's the way Volvo did an analytics. They saw that 48% of people were scrolling down to see the majority of the content, etc. So yes, you can track how far somebody scrolls down a page, so that's quite a nice feature. People miss content, that is harder. You can have elements there that you know they've done. We can put questions in and check they've answered questions, etc. But if someone just whips down quickly, they get to the end. I would argue you have the same issue with e-learning. If someone hits next and goes through fairly quickly, they may or may not have read what was on the screen, but they got to the end of the 6 pages or whatever it happened to be that they were going through. So they're standard issues that we have to deal with in terms of engaging design and making sure we engage people as we move down. Having said that, if you remember that HTML page I showed you with the navigation on the left, sometimes it might be appropriate that people jump to a section, and we've built in search to our responsive e-learning design framework, so you can just search for a word and jump straight there. And on a mobile phone, that may be more suitable than scrolling to the relevant section. So I think particularly for the phone versions, people probably use it more for support. They probably just want to search, go to the section. We're probably less concerned with that. But yes, we can track how they've come down the page. Can we track they've read it? Not really. I mean, people talked about using retina scans and seeing that people really read it. That's a little way off, I think. So that's still slightly difficult. But we can put questions and check they've answered the questions and track scores in the normal way.
Steve, I've made you the presenter just in case you want to jump to a particular slide, and the deck there, and you can go through it. If you want to see a particular slide and jump to it, best thing is, by the way, to go to the View menu and choose Thumbnails, which gives you a view of the slides on the left-hand side.
That's fine.
Let's quickly run through some other questions. You mentioned there the idea of creating content, packaging it up, compiling it, using it with SCORM and an LMS. We had lots of questions about HTML5, SCORM, and LMSs. Can you just clarify that this approach can work, or can't work for that matter, with SCORM and with an LMS?
It can work with SCORM and LMS. So that's what we're being.
Yep.
There are different LMSs. SCORM in itself is not really a standard, so we have some issues there. I think the bigger issues, with a lot of our clients will be, do the LMSs have a mobile interface? So on a distribution, I think the ideal way to distribute, you just put it on your LMS. It's just on one place.
Yep.
Your users go there, they launch it, whether it's on a mobile or whether it's on a desktop. I think for some of our clients yet, they're getting there with a mobile interface to their LMS, but not necessarily there yet. But it gives you a single distribution point rather than having to load it to an app store or load it to another store and distribute it in multiple ways. I think that's an issue. I think the other issue we're encountering more with clients, if I'm honest, is about HTML5, is about the level of browser.
Well, that was a question that came up. Huge firestorm about browsers, and slagging off IE6 as usual.
Right.
In 30 seconds, what's your take on browsers, and how much are you hampered by the browser that is installed users?
You are hampered, although there are new frame sets coming out, even for IE6, which may help a little. But yes, if you're on IE6, you're not going to use some of the latest responsive technologies. You are using a browser that's 13 years old that the manufacturer doesn't support any longer and doesn't update. So there is a problem if you're using IE6. And I still know and appreciate a lot of our clients still use it because of operational systems within their businesses. It will obviously get phased out over time. Microsoft actively recommend people do not use IE6. So you are going to be more limited. You would have to have what we're doing for clients at the moment is having a fallback HTML version which works on the desktop. It's not responsive, but we still have an HTML5 version as well, which is then responsive to all modern browsers, different devices. And then we have a fallback HTML4 version, or HTML version really, for old browsers, so you would have to have a fallback version. Yes, if you've got an older browser, you just can't expect to use some of the more modern technologies, unfortunately.
And Richardson says, are there any authoring tools out there that produce multiple device content at the moment?
I don't believe there are. I've actually been engaged in some conversation with colleagues at Articulate, etc., saying, guys, love to share what we're doing with you. I think they'll have to do it. That's my purview. I may be wrong. I think Articulate and people are generally good at responding to the market and what it wants. I personally think the market will want responsive design. That's a lot more work for them to do than to just produce HTML version from Storyline that works on the iPad. But I just think that's where the web tool's going. I think we will follow. That's my personal view.
So no at the moment, but it will come.
And Captivate, someone just put in the chat room, Captivate exports, and I have to say I've been quite impressed with the Captivate exports to HTML. I think they work quite nicely. The authoring tools like Articulate and Captivate, they knew they had to produce HTML versions.
Yep.
They knew they have to produce content that works on an iPad. It's the best-selling computer ever. They're dead in the water if they don't.
Yeah.
So they've moved very quickly, and they've produced tools which are published to Flash and to HTML. I think that's a step forward. I think it's complicated for them. To be fair, this technology is relatively new. You saw the graph. You can only do these things really in the last 12 months or so. I think, though, that if one gets a head start, if Articulate come out and produces responsive HTML, I think it'll a lot more than authoring tools that produce responsive HTML. So I don't know, but my sense is if it's what the market wants, those guys, and they do that to both Adobe and Articulate, they're well-funded companies. They put a lot of investment in, and they will move with the market, I think. I think it depends on the reactions to sessions like this. If people want responsive HTML design, and there are things not necessarily straightforward around it. Certain browsers handle different videos, so sometimes we have to publish the video in multiple formats so that we make sure it will play in all the browsers. And we've got a big people here now with the headaches of doing all the cross-compatibility. So when you build your own framework, and whilst we're not using proprietary technology, you can build your own responsive framework, as we have. Yep. You need a lot of people doing cross-compatibility testing with browsers to make sure it works in all your browsers. So back almost 10 years ago to do cross-compatibility testing.
Right, so you've got a whole bunch of browsers being run on a whole bunch of devices, and that's a fairly labour-intensive...
But once you've built your framework, it's fine. Because once you've got your framework and you've got your widgets that they adapt for each browser, and you've done your own cross-compatibility testing, as we've done, then okay, because you've then done it. But up front, somebody has to do that. You can't build an animation, switch it into something else. You then have to cross-compatibility check it all. But people will, I think, produce responsive frameworks, and certainly the CMS tools and things are doing that.
Axel asked, can you have a floating window that stays in view as you scroll the main page? And Wendy and other people said, yes, you can.
Yeah.
Saw that. Quick point, Johanna, is red, that is responsive e-learning design, is it tied to HTML5? She didn't quite catch that, so...
Effectively it is, yeah.
It is, yes. Yeah. Okay, I just wanted to get these points of clarification. To talk about Storyline, which I'm just going to pass by because some people are raving about it and some people are saying it's old school. I just don't want to get dragged into some sort of argument about that. John says, can Steve tell us a bit about the Kineo Adapt framework? I think you just have told us an awful lot about it. I'm going to jump back to my Word document. What I do is, as the chat storms past, I collect bits and put it in to a Word document. Scott Andre asked, I assume everything here is for browser-based learning rather than an app, which I think is correct.
Yeah.
Design.
That's what we see the future is that people will have good browsers on their devices and they use that rather than the old school approach really of installing specific software for specific devices. Well,
we had a conversation about this, didn't we? And if we have time at the end, which we won't, we can have an argument about is there a case for vertical integration in some cases with having an app? But it's sufficient to say that your fit, Steve, is that if to reach people who may, and you guarantee what device they've got, and you want to build in future shock. Anyway, if you want to be future-proof, then you should build. Don't go to any device.
I'm not saying don't do native apps because I think there's a place for native apps. My feeling around this, and it'd be good to get views, is that it's more for performance support type apps. And if we're delivering content out and tracking, I think one single version may be the better way to do that.
Okay, well, that's a fair and very clear way of putting it. Design skills was one lot of stuff that came up. Pennington said, do you think this approach is valid today given old browsers? I think we've covered the browser thing. We are restricted, but people are moving on. Jenny Clayton wants to know how much programming knowledge do you need to create this, and Sarah Tucker said, how easy is it to create HTML5? John Curran said, I'm still waiting for some good easy-to-use HTML5 development tools. And Bobby Vernon said, I'm with Jenny, how do you go about doing this as an instructional designer? What tools do we need? What software? I'd like to get a head start. So any thoughts for the designers out there who want to get cracking, but they're not really hard code?
Well, there are two elements, really. I don't think there are authoring tools out there that are publicly available to buy that do responsive design yet. What we built was a framework, so our designers internally can design for that framework. We've got the type of interactions that you see there that are available to them. They can decide how they display them on a page, etc. So our designers are now working with our framework, and if we work with clients, they work with our framework or somebody else's framework. But putting the framework together really requires just very good HTML, CSS type web skills. And I think that's an issue for the e-learning industry, that Flash isn't completely dead. I don't agree with necessarily all the comments there, because I think for doing some system simulations, other things, if you're only delivering to a desktop, some of our clients are only delivering to desktops, it has a place, absolutely has a place. But what we're likely to see in terms of e-learning technical skills, we're likely to see e-learning companies require more people with web, HTML, CSS skills than we're requiring them to see more Flash skills. So I think that's my sense of it in terms of where the skill sets will go. But unfortunately for those people who just want to get designing in this, obviously who work with companies like us or others as doing responsive design, there are no sort of articulate type responsive design tools out there yet. Working with our designers and writers on those vertical scrolling pages we've had a really positive reaction. A lot of designers really like it, because also we don't have to worry so much about things like text overruns and all those things we worry about in learning. We try and fit the text to the page we've got, etc. And also there's the new exploratory style. I think there's a different type of elegance and sort of in that sort of scrolling style in terms of how you can tell a story and unfold as you go down. We think is more natural. I've been playing with our adapt stuff on my iPad, and I like just being able to scroll down. And it just feels natural. And I think it's what Amazon are saying was the reason they like long pages is basically that means no navigation. The user just keeps going down. As opposed to click next, oh, well, I won't bother going to the next screen, etc. So there's a lot of evidence on the web that people go further with a scrolling design than they do clicking to a next section.
You quoted the stats on my earlier, Steve, and I was surprised by those. But they,
that's in the slides.
I just think it's extraordinary. I was all for good stuff above the fold, no scrolling. I tell you what, Steve, you have to change my mind on that one. Time for a couple of quick questions, and then I think we're going to have to wrap up. But I do appreciate that with 244 people in the room, we are still there's going to be a lot of questions which haven't answered, for which my apology. We'll get this onto the site. We will continue the discussion. Sarah Tucker, quick question, quick answer if you can, Steve. If you wanted to learn HTML5, what package would you recommend as a good, learner-friendly way of upskilling myself? Any thoughts about that?
I'm sorry, I'm not a technical person, but I'm very happy if someone wants to maybe contact me. I'm very our development team, I'm sure.
There we go. Sarah, Steve works with a bunch of people who can answer that question. So tell him.
Technical people, it's not me. So I must take credit for this. In fact, the credit for this goes really in our junior designers. I was walking around the office one day. I'd like to say it's all me. I've been looking around at this stuff, but one of our junior designers really talked to me about why aren't we doing this, why aren't we doing that, and I think they're now one of our juniors, and that's interesting. And so I think often it's younger people coming through who push us really, and we just have to be receptive to that in terms of what's available on the web. And it just made me go out and really look at the web and see what's happening, and it opened my eyes quite a bit, really. But the credit really goes to our developers in the development team and some of our graphics people who have really come to me and said, why aren't we doing this, Steve? Why aren't we doing that? And you just need an open culture to say, okay, let's put some prototypes together, see what it does.
Steve, it's extraordinary sometimes. You get people coming in and they just bring out new ideas, and you think, my goodness, you're absolutely right. And maybe the guys have done that with you. And I think in conversation this week and last week and seeing the presentation again today, actually, once again, I've had my eyes open. So it's a great learning experience. There's a bunch of stuff here which we haven't answered, and my apologies for that. But with many people and with such provocative, interesting, I don't see there's any other way around it. We simply got to the stage where we've filled up the bucket of time and we can't go any further. I'm going to have to take control and go to my wrap up. I'm sure everyone's going to be asking, will this be available afterwards? The answer is yes. I'm going to try to make sure this. Let me go to my slides. If you've enjoyed it and you're on Twitter, then please go to #LSG webinar and tell the world about it. Actually, there's been playing on with that already. Here's the place to go to for the recording, slides, and web chat. So it's learningandskillsgroup.com. Go to the sign up button if you're not already a member. It is free. There is no approval. Well, there's a slight approval process to check you're not a bot, but that's it.
Just say, Don, I don't know if I can, but on our website, on our YouTube channel, there's a very short video which just shows us dragging screens to different sizes and how it works.
And what's the URL? Can you just put that into there?
Our website is just Kineo.com,
okay.
and the youtube.com/kinelearning. If you go to our website, you'll see the links. Thank
you much, Steve, for that reminder. So do go there. We'll make sure that stuff is available. And it's been a fantastic journey today. I want to thank everyone here for their participation. As always, it's the reflection, the thoughts, the provocative comments from the audience that really force us to explore what we're talking about, or rather, explore what Steve's talking about. And I have to say thanks, Steve, for a very paced and, I have to say, groundbreaking view of mobile learning design, and choosing to launch it and bring your thoughts to the world, the Learning and Skills Group, Steve. I do appreciate it. Vanessa Alla is saying, I've learned a lot, and so have I, and it's the second time I've seen it, so goodness knows, I probably didn't take in much first time around. Our next webinar, yes, thanks to the chat peeps, as Kim George says. Our next webinars are up on the 4th of October 2012. We've got Paul, and we've got Ed Scruton talking about squaring the circle, how to make corporate learning personal, and the value of high-quality learning content. I think the point here is, yes, generated content and so on is fine, but sometimes what you need to do is create some higher quality, higher value stuff. Well, how do you go about doing that? So for more information, please contact me at learningandskillsgroup.com. That's my LinkedIn account. To agree with Jihan, that was quick. It was quick, wasn't it? It feels like my mind's gone through a washing machine. There's so much in it, and there's so much content from the chat area. Once again, thank you to everyone for participating. I hope to see you on the 4th of October. And Steve, once again, thanks to you for bringing really something really new to us in the group today.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Bye now.